All right, diving right in today. Looks like we're going deep on the autism spectrum.
Yeah, really fascinating stuff.
And you've given us so much to work with. Articles, blog posts, even some website excerpts, huh?
Lots to unpack there.
Yeah, a lot about social skills, ABA therapy, sensory experiences.
And I noticed a lot focusing on high-masking autistic women.
Definitely a theme there. So maybe we can start with the basics just to make sure we're all on the same page. When we talk about autism spectrum disorder, what does that really mean?
Well, think of it like, instead of one condition, think of it as a whole landscape of neurodevelopmental differences. That's the autism spectrum.
I like that. A landscape. So like each person's experience is going to be unique.
Exactly, yeah. Everyone has their own strengths and challenges.
Right. Makes sense. And how does neurodiversity fit into all this?
Well, neurodiversity really embraces that idea, right? It sees these differences not as defects, not as things to be fixed.
But just as natural variations.
Exactly. Just natural variations in how our brains work.
Yeah.
Like, it's not about being broken, it's just a different way of experiencing the world.
Makes sense. Okay, so you sent in a blog post with a really provocative title, and I have to ask you about it. Autism needs to be cured, with a big question mark.
Yeah.
Clearly that idea struck a nerve, right? Why do you think that myth persists? That autism needs to be cured?
Well, there's a long history, I think, of viewing anything outside what people consider the norm as something that needs correcting, you know?
All right, sort of a fix-it mentality.
Yeah, exactly. And we're learning now that autism is not about being broken. It's just, like we were saying, a different way of experiencing the world.
And that's where neurodiversity comes in.
Right.
Right.
Recognizing and respecting those differences.
Okay, I see the connection. Now, one of the sources you sent in talks about an autistic person who felt like they were constantly performing in social situations,
Oh, interesting.
which really highlights the need for acceptance and accommodation, not trying to force everyone to be the same.
Exactly. Like, trying to cure someone's autism can be so damaging,
Yeah.
you know?
In what way?
It can lead to feelings of shame, like there's something inherently wrong with them, you know?
Right, right. Like
Yeah.
they need to be fixed.
Exactly. And it can also result in therapies that focus on suppressing those natural autistic traits instead of actually helping them thrive as they are.
I see. So you're not necessarily against all therapy. It's more about the approach.
Right. It's about focusing on the individual and what works for them.
Gotcha. Now, speaking of therapy, you've included some articles about ABA therapy, applied behavioral analysis, with both benefits and controversies highlighted.
Right. It's definitely nuanced.
Yeah, one article is called Cheap ABA, and another is Understanding the Controversy Around ABA Therapy.
Those are good ones, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like people have some really strong opinions about it.
Well, ABA can be effective,
Mhm.
for sure. Like, it can be really helpful in teaching practical skills and managing some behavioral challenges.
So what are the controversies?
Well, some forms of ABA, especially older approaches, they've been criticized, and rightfully so, I think, for trying to force autistic people to, like, mask their autism.
It's fit in.
Yeah, to basically conform to neurotypical standards. And that can be really damaging.
So it's not the therapy itself, but the approach.
Precisely. It really needs to be individualized. It needs to respect the person's autonomy. And it should focus on improving their quality of life, you know?
And not making them appear less autistic.
Exactly.
Makes sense. Now, a big focus in your materials is high-masking autistic women.
Right.
You even sent in an article called How to Spot Autism in High-Masking Autistic Women, so clearly you're interested in this.
Definitely.
So what does high-masking even mean in this context?
Well, imagine feeling constant pressure to hide your true self, to conform to all these social expectations that really don't align with how your brain works, you know?
Yeah, that sounds exhausting.
It is. It's exhausting. And autistic women especially are often pressured to suppress their natural behaviors. They're expected to mimic neurotypical social cues.
So they're constantly on.
Yeah, always performing.
You also included an article called The Challenges of High Masking in Autistic Adult Women. It sounds like this can have some serious consequences.
It can, yeah. It contributes to misdiagnosis or delayed diagnosis.
So they might fly under the radar.
Yeah, they might be overlooked, dismissed, told they're just shy or too sensitive. But this constant masking, it takes a toll, you know? It leads to chronic stress, anxiety, burnout, even physical health problems.
Wow, that's a lot to carry.
It is, yeah. And it can be really hard to get the support they need when their autism isn't recognized.
It's like they're living a double life.
Exactly. And that's not sustainable in the long run.
So how can we better recognize and support these women? What signs should we look for?
Well, sometimes the signs are subtle. They might, be really good at mimicking social behavior.
But takes a lot out of them.
Yeah. They might feel drained afterwards. They might struggle with unspoken social rules or experience sensory overload in, like, busy environments.
Yeah.
And a lot of them have spent years feeling like they're constantly acting, never truly understood.
Yeah, one article you included was really powerful about a woman who was diagnosed late in life. And when she got that diagnosis, it was like everything clicked into place. Like, oh, that's why social situations always felt so draining.
It's amazing how much a diagnosis can change things, isn't it?
It is. It's like suddenly they have a framework for understanding their own experiences.
Exactly. And it highlights how important it is to raise awareness,
Do people know what to look for?
Right. To educate people about the different ways autism can present itself, especially in women.
Yeah.
Because it's not always what people expect.
Right. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. Let's shift gears a bit. A lot of your selections focus on sensory experiences. There's articles about stimming, sensory overload, specific fears, like buttons, zippers, even butterflies. What makes understanding this so important when we talk about autism?
Well, the sensory world can be really intense for autistic individuals.
Yeah.
Imagine sounds being amplified, lights feeling super bright, textures that are just unbearably abrasive.
Like everything's turned up to 11.
Yeah, kind of.
And you mentioned stimming earlier. What's the purpose of that?
So stimming, or self-stimulatory behavior, is basically a way for autistic people to regulate their sensory input,
Okay.
to regulate their emotions.
I see, like a coping mechanism.
Right. And it can involve like repetitive movements, sounds, or visual stimulation. Things like rocking, hand flapping, humming, even arranging objects in a specific way.
It sounds like a way to create order in a world that might feel chaotic.
Yeah, exactly. It can be very calming. It can help to manage overwhelming sensations. So instead of seeing these behaviors as problems, we need to understand that they're often strategies.
Strategies for coping.
Yeah, for navigating a world that can feel very overwhelming.
That's really helpful to understand. It shifts the perspective, right? Like instead of trying to stop those behaviors, we can focus on creating environments that are more accommodating, less overwhelming.
Exactly. It's about meeting people where they are,
Yeah,
and understanding their needs.
makes sense. Okay, something I wasn't expecting to see so much of in your sources was religious trauma syndrome, RTS. You even sent in a whole mini-series on autism and religious trauma syndrome.
Yeah, it's an important connection.
I'm curious about that connection. Why is that showing up so much in your selections?
Well, RTS, for those who aren't familiar, is about psychological and emotional distress that stems from harmful or traumatic experiences within a religious context.
So that could be anything from spiritual abuse to rigid doctrines.
Yeah, it could be shunning, feeling forced to suppress your identity or your beliefs. And for autistic individuals, religious settings can be particularly challenging. Well, these environments often emphasize conformity, social hierarchies, and a lot of unspoken rules.
Which can be hard for anyone to navigate, really.
Of course, but especially for those on the spectrum. They might struggle with the social cues, the abstract concepts, the sensory overload.
Like the loud music, the crowds.
Exactly, yeah.
Like,
And if they're already high masking, trying to fit into that kind of rigid environment could make things even worse.
right. So it's like a double whammy.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah.
And if they experience trauma or abuse within that context, it could be compounded by their autism.
It's like they don't have the same tools to process it.
Right. They might struggle to express their feelings or understand what happened, making it even harder to heal. So it's a complex issue, for sure.
It is. And it really underscores how crucial it is to consider the intersectionality of different identities and experiences, especially with something as complex as autism.
I completely agree. Autism doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Yeah.
It intersects with gender, race, culture, socioeconomic status, so many other factors.
Yeah, and each intersection can shape an individual's experience and the support they receive.
Personal.
Okay, before we move on, I want to tackle some of those persistent myths and stereotypes about autism. Your sources include articles like Debunking the Myth, High Masking Autistic Individuals in Anime, and The Myth of Curing Autism with the Keto Diet. And there's one that caught my eye. Worst cringy advice autistic women hear.
Oh, yeah, those are good ones.
So let's dive in. I'd love for you, our listener, to think about your own assumptions about autism as we talk about this.
I think that's a great idea. What have you heard? And where did that information come from?
Right. Question those sources. Where did you learn about autism?
It's a good way to practice critical thinking, and it helps us all move toward a more accurate, more compassionate understanding.
Exactly. So where should we start? What are some of those common myths that we need to address?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones is that all autistic people are the same.
Right, like it's one monolithic group.
Right. But as we discussed earlier, it's a spectrum, you know.
Huge spectrum.
Exactly. And there's this myth that autistic people lack empathy, which is just not true.
Yeah, I've heard that one.
They may express empathy differently, but that doesn't mean they don't feel it deeply.
Okay, what else is on our myth-busting agenda?
Well, there's the misconception that autistic people are all geniuses or savants.
What a Rain Man stereotype.
Exactly. And while some autistic people do have extraordinary talents, it's important to remember that that's not true for everyone on the spectrum. It's a very narrow view.
Right. Okay, we're starting to chip away at these stereotypes. One more I want to bring up, and this one's really harmful.
Okay, which one?
The idea that autism is caused by bad parenting or vaccines.
Oh, gosh, yes. Those are incredibly harmful and completely unfounded. Like, there's no scientific evidence to support those claims.
Zero.
Zero. Autism is a neurodevelopmental difference. Full stop. And we need to stop blaming parents or external factors.
Absolutely.
It's about understanding the brain, and how it develops.
Okay, I'm glad we could address that head on. It's so important to rely on evidence-based information.
I agree.
All right, well, I feel like we've laid some important groundwork here. This has been a great start.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm excited to dive deeper into the nuances of autism spectrum disorder in our next segment.
Me too. There's so much more to explore.
Absolutely. Another myth that we hear a lot is that autistic people are all antisocial or prefer to be alone.
Yeah, that one's so pervasive, isn't it?
It is, but it's not really accurate.
At all.
Huh.
It paints this picture of, autistic people as lone wolves who just avoid interaction at all costs.
Right.
And that's just not true. I mean, while some autistic individuals might value solitude, many crave social connection, meaningful relationships, just like anyone else.
So it's not about a lack of desire for connection. It's more about the way that connection is expressed and experienced.
Exactly. We need to move away from this idea that there's one right way to socialize.
Yeah, like everyone's got to fit in this little box.
Right. And we need to recognize that autistic individuals can have really fulfilling social lives, even if their communication styles are different.
It's about respecting those differences.
Absolutely.
Your materials highlight a really interesting point about nonverbal communication,
Oh, yeah.
like body language and facial expressions.
Right.
For someone on the spectrum, those subtle cues can be hard to interpret.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah.
It can lead to a lot of misunderstandings in social situations.
Because it's like a whole other language almost.
It is. Imagine trying to decipher a secret code without the key.
Ooh, that's a good analogy.
Right. That's what it can feel like for someone on the spectrum who's trying to navigate all those complexities of nonverbal communication.
Yeah.
It's not that they don't want to engage. They might just need, more explicit explanations.
Or support to understand those unspoken signals.
Exactly.
It makes you realize how much we take for granted, just in terms of social fluency.
We really do. It's like we're all operating on a different set of instructions sometimes.
And that can lead to a lot of frustration on both sides.
It can, yeah.
So instead of assuming someone's being intentionally rude or dismissive,
Yeah.
we should consider that there might be some underlying communication differences at play.
Exactly. Give people the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
And, be patient.
You included some really powerful stories from autistic individuals who have experienced social rejection or isolation.
Yeah, those are tough to read.
They are. One person described feeling like they were speaking a different language than everyone else.
Oh, wow. That's such a poignant way to put it.
Isn't it? It really gets to the heart of that feeling of not belonging,
It does. It's heartbreaking to hear those accounts, but I think it also underscores how important it is to create inclusive environments.
Where everyone feels welcome.
Exactly. Regardless of their communication style.
I want to shift gears a bit and touch on something that came up a few times in your selections.
Okay?
The intersectionality of autism with other identities, particularly race, gender, and socioeconomic status.
Yeah, we can't ignore that, can we? It's such a vital aspect of the conversation.
Because autism doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Exactly. It intersects with every facet of a person's identity. And those intersections can really impact their experiences.
You included articles specifically about disparities in diagnosis and care for Black children and the unique challenges faced by autistic Black women.
Right. And those are just a couple of examples,
Yeah, and those articles really shed light on how systemic biases and inequalities
Hmm.
can create significant disadvantages for autistic individuals from marginalized communities.
They can. For example, research shows that Black children are often diagnosed later than white children,
Really? Even when they're presenting with similar symptoms?
even when they're presenting with similar symptoms. And that
Yeah.
delay can have, ripple effects throughout their lives.
Wow. So why is that? Are there specific factors contributing to that disparity?
Well, there are several. I mean, there are cultural differences in how autism is perceived and understood. There are implicit biases among healthcare professionals,
Oh, wow.
and limited access to quality healthcare and resources for families from marginalized communities.
It's like they're facing multiple layers of obstacles
Exactly.
just to get the support they need.
Right.
That's really disheartening.
It is. And that's why it's so important to, talk about these disparities openly, advocate for equitable access to diagnosis, care, and support for all autistic individuals.
Regardless of their background.
Exactly. Regardless of their background, we need to make sure everyone has the same opportunities to thrive.
Absolutely. You also included a fascinating article about the experience of autistic people of color
Uh-huh.
who are often misdiagnosed with behavioral disorders or emotional disturbances.
Right.
It's a stark reminder of how unconscious bias can seep into even the most well-intentioned systems.
It can. And it really emphasizes the need for cultural competency in healthcare and education. We need professionals who are sensitive to those cultural differences.
And who can recognize the diverse ways autism can present itself across different communities.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Because it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
right.
We need to move away from those narrow definitions
Yeah.
and really expand our understanding of what autism can look like.
Yeah, we need to be mindful of those intersections and advocate for inclusivity at every level,
I agree.
making sure that everyone feels seen and heard and supported.
Absolutely.
Right.
And that extends beyond healthcare.
Yeah.
We need to create inclusive communities where autistic individuals of all backgrounds feel welcomed and respected and valued.
It's about creating a sense of belonging.
It is. It's about saying, you're welcome here. You're a part of this.
Yeah. One of your sources talked about the concept of double empathy.
Oh, interesting.
The idea that communication breakdowns often happen not because of deficits in the autistic person,
Yeah.
but because of a lack of understanding between autistic and neurotypical individuals.
Ooh, I like that. That's a really powerful way to frame it.
It is, isn't it? It kind of shifts the focus. It's not about trying to fix the autistic person. It's about fostering understanding,
Right. Building bridges between those different neurotypes.
Yeah, finding that common ground.
Exactly.
It seems like a lot of these issues stem from a lack of awareness and education.
I think that's true.
So I'm hoping that this deep dive can help contribute to a greater understanding of the complexities of autism.
Me too, definitely. Knowledge is power.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we understand each other's experiences.
The better equipped we are to create a more inclusive and compassionate world.
Exactly.
I'm curious to hear from you, our listener. What's resonating with you as we explore these different facets of autism? Are you reflecting on your own assumptions?
Yeah. Are you thinking about ways to be a better ally to autistic individuals in your life? Maybe you're feeling inspired to learn more about a specific topic we've discussed. Whatever it is, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning your own perspectives.
Before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, I want to touch on a really important point.
Good.
The concept of self-advocacy. Finding your voice as an autistic person.
That's huge.
It is. You included a powerful article titled, "Self-Advocacy is Not Asking for Special Treatment. Empowering Autistic Individuals."
Oh, yeah, that one's great. It really resonated with me.
It did with me too. And it emphasizes that self-advocacy is about asserting your needs and rights, not seeking special favors.
It's about being empowered.
Exactly.
And for autistic individuals who might have been conditioned to mask their autism or suppress their authentic selves to fit in, finding that voice can be so challenging.
Yeah.
But it's so important.
It is. And finding a community can help with that, right? Like connecting with other autistic people.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
There are so many amazing online communities, support groups, even autistic-led organizations that provide those spaces,
Yeah, spaces for sharing experiences.
Right. Advocating for change. Celebrating neurodiversity.
One of your sources, a blog post by an autistic self-advocate, talks about the importance of finding your tribe, people who understand your experiences and celebrate your neurodiversity.
I love that.
It's such a powerful reminder that we all need to find our people,
You do.
those who get us,
Ma.
and accept us for who we are.
It's about finding belonging
Yes.
and validation. These communities offer a space where autistic individuals can truly be themselves.
Without judgment.
Yeah, without judgment, without pressure to conform.
You also included some resources for parents of autistic children,
Oh, yeah.
highlighting the importance of early intervention and finding the right support systems.
Early intervention can make such a difference in a child's development and well-being. And for parents, connecting with other families who are navigating similar journeys can be so invaluable.
It's like a lifeline.
It is. It's that shared understanding, that sense of, I'm not alone in this.
There's this one article that stood out to me. It's written by a parent of an autistic child,
Okay.
and they talk about the initial shock
Uh-huh.
and grief of the diagnosis,
Yeah, that's common.
but also the immense love and joy that their child brings to their lives.
That's so beautiful.
Hmm.
It's a reminder that autism is not a tragedy.
No.
It's a different way of being. And it can bring such unique strengths and perspectives to individuals and families and communities.
And it's so important to focus on those strengths,
It
to
is.
celebrate those differences.
Absolutely.
I'm really inspired by the stories of resilience and advocacy that we're seeing in these sources. It's clear that the autism community is not just surviving,
But thriving.
but thriving and making their voices heard in powerful ways.
And that's something to celebrate.
It is. We've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive.
We have.
From the challenges of social interaction and integrating systemic biases to the importance of self-advocacy and finding community.
It's been a really rich and insightful exploration so far.
It has. And in our final part, we'll delve into some more specific examples and stories from your sources, bringing these concepts to life in even greater detail.
I'm looking forward to it.
Welcome back. So, we've explored a lot of concepts, but I think it's time to bring some of those ideas to life.
I agree.
Through those specific examples and personal stories.
It's always more impactful, right? When you can connect those dots.
It is. There's this one article, Worst Cringy Advice Autistic Women Hear, and it just perfectly captures those frustrations and misconceptions that autistic people face every day.
Yeah, especially women.
Especially women. It's like, even when people are trying to be helpful, their advice can be so off base.
Because they're coming from a place of not understanding, right?
Exactly. Like they're trying to fix something that doesn't need to be fixed.
Right. It highlights the importance of really listening to autistic experiences, validating them, instead of just jumping in with solutions.
Right. Like meet them where they are.
Exactly.
Another section that really struck me focused on those everyday sensory experiences and challenges.
Oh, yeah. Those are always eye-opening.
They are. I knew about sensory sensitivities, but reading about like someone's intense fear of buttons
Interesting.
or the overwhelming experience of riding an escalator, it just brings it home in such a visceral way.
It's those specific, tangible examples, right?
Yeah.
That help us step outside our own neurotypical perspectives.
Yeah, like I can't even imagine being afraid of a button.
Right. But for someone with sensory processing differences, it could be a source of genuine distress.
So it challenges us to rethink our assumptions about what's normal or rational.
Exactly. Like, what's weird to one person might be perfectly understandable to another.
You mentioned the fear of buttons. There's also an article about autistic fears, butterflies.
Oh, yeah. That one's fascinating.
It might seem odd at first, but when you delve into that sensory aspect, it makes total sense.
Yeah, the visual patterns on butterfly wings
Mm.
or their erratic flight patterns. It can be really overwhelming for someone with those sensory processing differences.
So how can we be more sensitive to these sensory differences in everyday life?
Well, I mean, we can't eliminate every potential trigger, right?
No, the world's full of buttons and butterflies.
Right. But we can be mindful. We can be considerate. If you know someone who has a fear of butterflies, maybe you avoid wearing clothes with butterfly patterns, or you steer clear of butterfly gardens. Just those little adjustments to show that you care.
Those small gestures can make a world of difference.
They really can. It's about shifting our mindset from, that's weird, to how can I be more supportive?
Exactly. And sometimes the most supportive thing you can do is just ask, what can I do to make this more comfortable for you?
Exactly. That open communication is key.
One theme that comes up a lot is the importance of self-advocacy, finding your voice as an autistic person. There's this article, Self-advocacy is not asking for special treatment, empowering autistic individuals.
Oh, that's a good one.
It is. It really emphasizes that it's about asserting your needs and your rights, not seeking special favors.
Exactly. It's about empowerment.
Yeah.
And, for autistic individuals who may have been taught to mask their autism, to suppress their authentic
Yeah,
selves.
just to fit in.
Right, finding that voice can be so challenging.
And it makes me think about the importance of finding your tribe, connecting with other autistic people.
Yeah, finding that community.
Yeah, because they get it.
They do. And, you included some great resources about online communities, support groups, even autistic-led organizations.
Yeah, and they're creating these spaces for sharing,
Yeah.
advocating, celebrating neurodiversity.
It's amazing how many resources are out there now.
It is. There's one source, a blog post, that talks about the importance of finding your tribe.
Love that phrase.
And it really is about that. It's about finding those people who understand you, who celebrate your neurodiversity.
Yeah, and it's a powerful reminder that we all need to find our people,
We do.
those who get us and accept us for who we are.
I'm so inspired by those stories of resilience and advocacy that we see in these sources. It's clear that the autism community is not just surviving,
But thriving,
but thriving, making their voices heard in such powerful ways.
and that's something to celebrate.
It is. Well, we've reached the end of our deep dive.
Already, it feels like we just got started.
I know, but it's been an incredible journey. I feel like I've learned so much, not just about autism itself, but about the power of listening and understanding.
Embracing that beautiful diversity of human experience.
Exactly. So as we wrap up, remember that this is just the beginning of your exploration.
Keep learning, keep questioning, keep connecting.
Exactly. There's always more to discover, and the best way to do that is by listening to autistic voices, centering their experiences.
Let's amplify those voices.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.